right now, when you look at this Rhode Island election cycle, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, the marathon always turns into a sprint, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
I don't know. I've had disagreements with people on this. I think there's a lot of apathy out there. I think in the governor's race between Helena Foulkes and Dan McKee, it's a rematch from 4 years ago. There's been, as Buddy Sands used to say, gum on each of their shoe. The Washington Bridge has been a big brick around Dan McKee's neck, CVS and the opioids. And I think people are just kind of tired. And then you look, and we'll dive deep into it. But the overview is the AG and the lieutenant governor's race. There's four competitive people in each race, and people are like, what is going on? And the other thing, Bill, is our primary date needs to change. I don't hold out hope that it will, but we've been watching since February, March, these primaries all over the country because people are interested nationally what's going to happen with the midterms. But we're almost an afterthought in September, and then you only have 8 weeks to lock and load. This year, it's a day late because of Labor Day's as late as it can be. So my feeling is I'm going around a lot of people, even though a lot of the elections are going to be decided on primary day, people are like, I'm skipping the primary. So voter turnout, I'm very interested to see what it's going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see also from the standpoint of, not only voter turnout, but just the feeling on election day, which is such an abstract thing. But what does the after shock look like what do the after parties look like? How much energy is really around all of these, or really around all these campaigns, all these people, in terms of comparing and contrasting to previous years where it was very real? And you could see that there was a lot of enthusiasm in the days leading up, a lot of rallies, a lot of organic conversation. I just don't know if we're going to see that this year. It feels like many people have either checked out or they've decided this thing is already wrapped up in terms of the governor's race anyway.
The governor's race, but I do think that in the Providence mayor's race, there is a lot of buzz. And then the question is, will that help, hurt, whatever was, voter turnout? How does that help? Maybe Sabina Matos, who was a former Providence City Council member, does that give her a little bit of an edge as she's in a really close race for lieutenant governor? I will be interested to see what the turnout is in Providence and what the demographics are, because a lot of David Morales has energized a lot of young voters. But who traditionally votes in a primary? It's the old guys like me. It's the people who have always turned out. Well, the greatest generation is almost gone now, but people who always have taken voting as a sacred right, whether it's a primary or a general election, because they fought in World War II, they fought in the Korean War, to a lesser extent the Vietnam War. And so will all of that buzz around David Morales' campaign and the new voters that have come in, will that translate to getting people into the voting booth?
Right. I think, Providence mayor. I mean, let's talk about that, because that probably is the most interesting race in a lot of ways. It's for anybody who doesn't know or hasn't been paying attention, it's Mayor Smiley, who's the incumbent Democrat, being primaried by Representative David Morales. Morales is coming from a leftist position. Smiley viewed by many as more of a technocrat and I guess a centrist Democrat, if you will. So that's the fault line. It's garnered national attention, national money, and Morales by some metrics right now, by some internal polls, and even on, I don't know, we can make of this, but the prediction markets have him as likely to win this thing. So
yeah, well, prediction markets, signs, and endorsements don't win races. It's get out the vote. And look, I'm Switzerland on this, but Brett Smiley not only ran a campaign that toppled an incumbent governor when he ran Charlie Fogarty's race. That's why he came to Rhode Island from Chicago 20 years ago. He has been in politics the last 20 years. He's run his own race. He ran a race that he dropped out in 2014. So it's all voter rolls. Look at his fundraising. It's 10-1 on Morales. And we were talking about this on Lively last weekend. Morales said, well, yeah, I'm not going to advertise on TV like it's a dirty medium. Both of my panelists said if he had the money, he'd be on TV. So does money totally do it? I'm not sure. I do know in the governor's race, I mean, Dan McKee's basically gone dark because he does not have the money that Helena Foulkes has going into at the end of the primary. And as I said earlier, our primary is geared. Who's paying attention in June, July, half of August? Now, kids are going back to school beginning today in my community and a lot of other communities. So that almost flips the political mental switch. All right, now it's time to get geared in. The nights are a little bit cooler. Oh, there's a primary coming up. Maybe I'll early vote. Maybe I'll do the old traditional way, and I'll go. I'll go actually on Wednesday the 9th and see. So we'll see how that translates. But you'd start ask my question. You'd ask me a question early on about the governor's race.
Yeah.
It's a tough road to hoe for McKee. The WPRI poll showed him now 15 points down instead of 20 points down. Last I checked, there's 2 weeks until Election Day. So unless the polls are wildly off, and I'm not saying that they haven't been in the past, but every poll we've seen, whether it's been the Salve poll, the UNH poll, or the WPRI Emerson College poll, they've all pretty consistently had Helena Foulkes with a pretty good lead.
Yeah, no doubt about it that the governor is facing, from a pollable electorate standpoint, an uphill climb. They're arguing that, look, we've got the votes, we've got whether it's union membership, whether it's just on the ground working people, the polls are not hitting, and Election Day is going to show a different result than these polls are predicting. But
well, here's what works in his favor and what works against him. In his favor, he's actually true. Even though the AFL-CIO sat on the sidelines, he has been chipping away with like local union endorsements over the last 2 to 3 weeks. Whether they can get their people out, who knows? The other thing is, I think apathy would work really in his favor. If fewer people are going to get out to vote for Helena Foulkes, what works against him, if you look at the crosstabs on the WPRO poll, is the unfavorability ratings just have not changed
yeah,
for Dan McKee. So if you're going to look at undecided and it's 25% still, they're not likely to break Dan McKee's way. He needs those undecided votes to come to his side. And the union support in the poll is not exactly what you think it would be. So he really needs all of that to go his way. And again, if you believe the poll, it's just not in the cards.
yeah, to be determined in that regard. Let's go back to the Providence mayor's race, if we could, for just a moment. The other thing that is true, and you alluded to it, in terms of just political infrastructure. Yes, the grassroots movement that we've seen from David Morales is impressive. No question, it's turned into something very real. He's obviously a competitor in this race. But Smiley, he's got Eddie Catunia behind him right now, or working with him, the mail ballot king of Rhode Island. He knows the trenches. He knows the political game in a way that it's going to be very difficult from a turnout standpoint to beat Smiley. And I think that you're totally right. It's a get out the vote campaign. So with that sort of mindset, how does that translate, do you think, to other races outside of Providence that may not have a Morales or a Smiley type of get out the vote energy? Do you think that we're going to see low voter turnout?
Yeah, I do. And look at the numbers. I think, 100,000, 120,000 would be good for a Democratic primary. I was filling in on radio a couple of weeks ago, and we looked it up in the most recent competitive Republican primaries for governor. Jim Bennett took on Don Kucheri in his first race, and then Alan Fung and Ken Block back in 2014. You're lucky to get 25 or 30,000 people, and now the
Yeah,
Republicans such a smaller subsection. So the question is, as you translate to the other races, the AG, it's really Kim Ahern and Keith Hoffman at this point, but it's 35% undecided. And in the lieutenant governor's race, it's 43% has
yeah,
a commanding lead, because who really knows? We know Sabina Matos, but it works against her. She had that congressional race disaster a couple of years ago with the signature scandal. Do people really know Mayor Zai Kamzavorivong? We do. We've heard of him. It's a difficult name to pronounce. He's from Newport. Cindy Coyne and Sue Anderbaugh are down the line. I didn't even know there was a guy, Russ McCurdy, running. I didn't know that until I read the poll, and he checks in at a robust 2 or 3%, 4%. So I think there's apathy, because honestly, I think a lot of voters don't want to have to do the homework. It's not a Helena Foulkes, Dan McKee situation in those other races. It's a lot of people, and there's not a lot of separation between them, except in the AG's race. Joe Solomon is not as progressive. He's a little bit I would call him a moderate to conservative Democrat.
yeah.
But I mean, beyond some of that, what is the difference when you line them all up? Look, you had them on the debates, right? Did you see anything stand out in those debates that would separate them from the field?
No, and even Solomon, as much as he had the differentiation that moved him a little bit to the right of the others, it wasn't like there were questions about transgender sports participation that they were aligned on. So there wasn't even like on just a vocabulary or a messaging standpoint, there's really any separation. It's basically
Where
people.
where was Solomon on gun control?
He's to the right. He did
Yeah.
not sign. He was not on board with the bills, the one that passed, and then the most recent one, which nobody was on board with. That was the one that was proposed this year that had the confiscation of the grandfathered in bills, which is
I,
it
I
just would
think
never pass constitutional scrutiny.
I think even Democrats see the tea leaves, and we've
Yeah,
talked about this on Lively. Joe Larissa, who we've had on many times, studied he's to the right, but he studies the Constitution. Says they're waiting for one good gun bill to come before the Supreme Court. I don't know why it hasn't come yet, but a lot of this stuff, well, particularly with this court right now, I think is going to get struck down. So I think you're right. The Democrats were like, "That's a bridge too far for me. Confiscation, come on, that is totally unconstitutional."
what about the connection between what's happening on a national stage and local politics? It feels like right now, you would think with the resentment that a lot of people have in honestly on both sides, but certainly the anti-incumbent resentment when it comes to the president, you would think that would trickle down a little bit more to local elections. Do you think there is a connection there, or are they kind of viewed as separate things right now by most people?
Well, I think what you just hit on, anti-incumbent, and I think what works
Mm,
against Dan McKee. I mean, Dan McKee is about as far from Donald Trump as you could get, but McKee, it's almost like he's had two terms. It's really been one and a half, but he's filled out Gina Raimondo's term when she went to be the unexpired term when she went to be Commerce Secretary, and another one. But if he gets elected, it'll be 10 years, and I think there is one voter fatigue. I think there's a lot of stuff that just has stuck to Dan McKee, whether it's been ILO or the Washington Bridge or this payroll system, that people are just like, look, I don't care who it is. He's at the top. State government's broken. We need somebody new. This is what happened in 2016 with Donald Trump. I mean, I was doing talk radio back then, and I'm like, Donald Trump is never going to win primaries. Donald
right.
Trump's never going to get elected. And I realized in retrospect, people were just tired of the same old, same old. And the thought was, how bad can it be? Well, we found out with Trump how bad it could be twice. But I think with Helena Foulkes, we'll see what happens if she gets by and whether, who she'll be against Ken Block and whoever the Republican is. But I think the feeling that government is just failing us. What has this Congress done for us other than, and Trump's leading the way on the chaos, but what substantially have they done to make our lives better, And in fact, they've made it worse. So I think that definitely works against incumbents in this race. I'm not sure that's going to be a spillover with Brett Smiley. I don't think there's
Yeah.
an anti-incumbent. He's only been there 4 years. And I think for the most part has done a pretty, except for the snowstorm, but it was a record snowstorm. I think he's delivered on what he said. Our colleague Dan McGowan at the Globe had an interesting column that be careful what you wish for, because yesterday was opening day of the Providence schools for the first time in his mayorship under city control. And it really is, it's almost a definite lose one way or the other. You're not going to
Yeah.
gain a lot of goodwill from having the trains and the buses run on time, but a lot could go wrong.
Yeah.
Whether that happens in the next 2 weeks, I don't know. So that's kind of all over the place. But I think to your central question about,
Yeah.
is there trickle down from Washington? I think it's definitely, let's get rid of the people who are in. We just need change of some sort.
Hmm. Zooming out a little bit, just kind of looking at there are two Republican races that are. Look, we've talked a lot over the years on Lively Experiment, and I've certainly talked about it here on Bartholomew Town and on WPRO. I remember back in the day when I started the podcast, Mike Chippendale or Blake Filippi or Republicans would be pretty frequent guests. And then, people like Blake and others got out of politics altogether, and then the Chippendales dug in, and I haven't talked to him in 3 or 4 years. It just feels like there's a big divide there in a lot of ways. It just feels like it's siloed off from the rest of the ecosystem that I operate in anyway. Nobody that there's not many people who are going to give the Republican Party a look at just because they're an opposition party. We'll put it that way. Now that's cemented even more when you take a look at their candidates for governor right now and in the congressional race. Aaron Kukian is a guy who's he's a smart guy. I think he's got a lot to offer the state, and I think he's got a lot to offer in general. But I mean, come on, what kind of campaign is he really able to run when he's trailing somebody whose resume and basic origin story nobody really knows in Elaine Paulino, who describes herself as a social media influencer. If you watch the debate that they did on Channel 10, it was just it was shocking. It was shocking to see that the state of that race. And for the Republican Party, look at the congressional District 2 race. You got this, obviously, Stephen Scully. Look, he's a local oral surgeon. He took on the state over vaccine mandates. But he's a local guy. He's taken on this Vic Meller. Who knows who he is? Now he's got commercials that purport to have his ex-wife, who was a victim of domestic violence, standing up for him. I mean, it's a bizarre Michael Flynn adjacent type of operation. That's what the Rhode Island Republican Party is. So how could that possibly be an opposition party?
Yeah, I just heard that ad with Meller, actually, just within the last half hour. He had it on WPRO. The Republican primary is a dumpster fire between Paulino and Gukian. Whoever emerges, I think, just gets in the way of Ken Block really giving either Dan McKee or Helena Foulkes a run for the money. And at the end of the day, I mean, you have Scully and Meller not beating each other up, but Meller's got all this money that he's self-funded, and he really is very Trumpy and MAGA. That's never going to play, even in the 2nd Congressional District. If anybody was going to win that race, it was going to be Alan Fung. And truth be told, I think if you gave Seth Magazine a little truth serum on Election Day, he would have said, I don't think I'm going to win this race when he woke up. Now, he was reflective. You remember the Washington Post came in and did the big story when Kevin McCarthy was the House Speaker and came in to do a fundraiser for Fung that said, watch Rhode Island. It could be indicative of what's going on in the rest of the country. And you know what? It was, but not in the way they expected. It was because the red wave did not materialize. So I agree with you, especially in Rhode Island, that just the Republican Party, I think, has been directionless for a while. And I also think you have to start with the General Assembly. You need to be able to get enough people to sustain a veto or to work with others so that the House Speaker just can't go, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and nobody can question him or her because they've got all the votes. And so I think the best opportunity the Republicans had was after Don Kucheri got elected in 2002. That 2004 mid-cycle election, Kucheri should have been out there at every rubber chicken dinner trying to get Republican, because he was considered a common sense Republican. And this is long before Trump, let's do this in the General Assembly, then I can get somebody to sustain a veto. Never happened. He got reelected, then he was a lame duck. And the Republican Party's never been the same since.
Yeah, and he was barely reelected by, 2 percentage points ultimately in that race against Charlie Fogarty.
I was at the Biltmore with the Democrats that night, and we had to wait. They didn't call the race. Charlie Fogarty was waiting. They didn't call it until 1:00 in the morning. Then, of course, over the last decade, it's been Donald Trump. He has sucked all the oxygen out of the Republican room, and I just think nationally, the Republic. I tried to get Jack Reed to tell me this while I was we had him and Game Amo over at Ocean State Media last fall for kind of a back and forth with Ed Fitzpatrick. And I tried to get him to say, look, in the quiet moments with your Republican colleagues who have been there for so many years, why aren't they standing up to Trump? Right. And he said the quiet part out loud, which Lisa Murkowski did of Alaska. They're scared of him. They're just scared with social media and people, now we can unleash the mob. So I think in Rhode Island, the log cabin John Chafee Republicans just don't exist anymore. And so you see all these battles I think Aaron Gukian's pretty moderate. But I think if you look at the congressional races, it's just, I'm really interested to see whoever emerges from that, how they're going to do in the general election, because I think it's going to be a wipeout.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if they're being honest about it, they probably would drop out and maybe even you would see a party. Or how about this? If the Republican Party endorsed independent Ken Block, who that's my last question here, Hummel, is, Ken Block is no stranger to Rhode Island politics. He's been in and out of, different levels of the orbit, 2-time gubernatorial candidate. He was definitely high profile when he wrote the book that was about his experience working for the Trump campaign, trying to find proof of voter fraud. He's a data analyst by that's one of his businesses, and didn't find it. And then he wrote a book about it, and he became sort of an opposition figure to MAGA in some way, made a national name for himself, has done some independent, I guess you would call it, good government watchdog type stuff on the bridge and other projects. And now he's running for governor as an independent and polling at 21 to 20 something percent. He's viable all the way. Do you think do you think he's competitive if the Republicans get behind him?
With that, or if drop out, which I don't think is going to happen. But I mean, Elaine Polino, who Nancy Lavin from the current Rhode Island Current described as a retired comedian. I mean, it's really kind of hard to see what has she done over the years. Yes, if it was a one-on-one race, Ken Block would eat Helena Foulkes for lunch in a debate. In a one-on-one debate, I have no doubt. I presided over a debate that Grossmart had. A lot of these candidates are playing defense rather than offense. Recently, they've kind of poked the bear. McKee came out as I think he needed to, but Helena Foulkes, and I've talked to people about this. I like her personally. I think she would probably surround herself with good people. She's a little thin on some of the issues. Now, look, Ronald Reagan was a little thin on some of the issues. He had people surrounding him and good people, and that's what you have to do in administration. But if it got into one-on-one, we're going to, not have a distraction of another person over here, I think those would be very, very interesting debates. So will they drop out or get behind Ken Block? We'll see. But again, once you emerge from that primary, it's a very, very short timetable.
Yeah, and Ken Block, who has, he's mounted some sort of effort, if you will, to get himself out there. He's been on earned media a little bit on the radio and a little bit on television, but it's mostly clear that he's kind of waiting to deploy his messaging. I've seen signs. I'm not saying he's not out there, but he's going to need a big wave, and it's going to have to come in a way that doesn't involve big time television spending, because he just doesn't have, at least now, doesn't seem to have the dough to do that, to compete with either Helena Foulkes or who is the likely winner. Even if McKee gets in, he'll get a lot more money coming his way.
That's true.
All right, Hummel, we've got a lot coming up.
The first Rhode Island Democratic gubernatorial candidate forum is in the books, but the conversation is just beginning. Hosted by Bill Bartholomew, hear from Democratic candidates Helena Foulkes and Governor Dan McKee as they make their case to voters. Listen now at ripodcast.com or watch the full conversation at 997wpro.com.